Hello folks, welcome to the channel. During a recent pen test, I discovered some Firebase configuration keys that were stored publicly in a JS file. Though these configurations were meant to be public, but still the Firebase project which were using these configuration keys were not hardened properly, which then led me to access the data that was stored in the Firestore database. And I was able to see all the tables and the data that was stored in that Firestore DB. So today in this video, I'll develop that exact scenario and I'll show you where the developer makes mistakes and how you can figure it out to exploit it ahead. As most people think that these are meant to be stored publicly and they leave it without cross-checking it. So first of all, I'll develop a basic website and I'll link it with a Firebase project so that you can see during the development process also what mistakes developers make and how you can perform your recon to figure out those certain cases. And then obviously we'll see the attack. After that, I'll talk about the security rules which should be used to harden this Firebase project and to make sure that the Firestore DB and the storage buckets are not accessible to anyone other than the authorized users. So let's dive into the practical then. So here is our project directory. Now let's open VS Code in it. Now I'll create a basic HTML page which will serve as the index page. For this, I've already pre-written the HTML code so that the video doesn't get lengthy. So I'll just paste it here. Let's save it. Now let's see how the page looks. Here, first, we'll integrate a Google's OAuth mechanism for signing in, and then we'll create some data which will only be accessible to the account which logs in into the application. So I'll create a Firebase project now and fetch the configuration keys and integrate it into this app.js file. Let's create this file first. Now let's open the Firebase console. Click on Go to Console, create a new project, write a project name, continue, continue, create a default account. So the project is now ready. Click on continue. Here our lab is ready. We have the Spark plan activated, that is the basic plan. Now if you want to go for the paid plan, then you can also see here you will get a $300 worth of credit. So you can use this, and if you want to learn about Firebase, then you can also go ahead and learn, and it will be completely free of charge. Let's close the Gemini now. Here in the project overview, you can see the project settings. Then here you can see service accounts. This is also a sensitive functionality here. With this, you can perform admin level functions and you can do whatever you want into this particular project. So oftentimes if you identify this JSON key, then also it's a critical finding for your target. Here you can see if you click on generate new private key, then it tells keep it confidential and never store it in a public repository. So this is also one thing you can look for, but that is not in our scope for this video. So we will just move ahead with the integration process. We want to create a web app, so click on web, give it a name, click on register app. We don't want to host this application, we'll set it up locally. And here you can see we have got our configuration key, and you can also see it tells us like we need to use npm to install the Firebase. Let's continue to the console now. Go to VS Code and integrate it, copy it from here. Now open the terminal and install Firebase using npm. Now also install Firebase tools with npm globally in your system. Permission denied, so we need to use sudo. It is now installed. Now, if we want to execute this Firebase project, then we need to first initialize Firebase here. So for this, type Firebase init, clear the screen, Firebase init, Firestore. Let's do hosting also and emulators. You can select these options by clicking on backspace, and after you're done, just click on enter. We want to use an existing project. So these are all the projects in my Firebase account. So since I'm logged into Firebase in this terminal, so that's why it has access to this information. For login, you need to just type Firebase login and then hit enter, and you will be redirected to an application. So Fire vulnerabilities, Click on enter. Now we need to select a location. I'll use US Central. Now just press enter, then it will set up the rules in firestore.rules. Yep, and yes. Now here I don't want to set up GitHub, so I'll click on N, enter. We just want the hosting emulator. Enter. Default port would be 5000. It's okay. Enable emulator UI. Yes. Just click on enter. Yes. Firebase initialization is now complete. Now let's clear the screen once again. Here in the Firebase RC file, you can see it has the identifiers of this project and the JSON file. I do Firebase serve, but it's not the index page that we've built. Here you can see our index file is this one, but in the public directory, the index file is something else. Just delete it and drag it into the public directory. Now it's successfully loaded. We also need to bring the app.js directory here, save it. Now, in the app.js file, since we don't have these libraries installed locally, so we'll directly import it from the CDN libraries. For this, visit onto this URL, then go to this available libraries documentation. You can just copy this URL. Here, the latest version is 12.8.0, so just change it. We don't need analytics here, so let's just remove it. We'll also need Firestore, so just copy it and rename it for Firestore. Here I'll call it get Firestore. And also we'll need the authentication module. So let's also import that. Now let's initialize these modules also. Now if I do log app, then let's check it. Open the console. We can see the app object. Here you can see the configuration keys. You should also check the console for such information. Developers often forget to clear the console during the production deployment, or even sometimes in some error messages in the console, it also leaks these API keys. So you can also grab it from there. Now let's integrate this OAuth module. I'll just open the index and app.js side by side. Let's remove it and let's call it OAuth module integration. We need to make sure that when someone clicks onto these buttons, we listen them. So for this, okay, now when someone clicks onto the sign in button, I want to start the authentication process. So here I'll need to change this as it will be imported directly from the library itself. Same for this one. Now, when a user clicks on the sign out button, I need to make sure that the user logs out. Here, just need this one. Sign out, and I can copy this. Let's go back to the app, and here if I click on sign in with Google, we're getting an error. Constructor T is undefined. We need to provide the auth variable here since we've initialized the auth module into this variable, and the same will go in here. Now let's save it and rerun it. Again, another error says auth configuration not found. It is because in the Firebase console, we didn't set up the OAuth functionality. Let's do that now. In the build, click on authentication, get started. We'll be using Google here and enable save. Now in the users tab, you can enable this option if you want users to log in with just email and password. And here you can see you can also add users manually. You just provide an email and a password and they will be able to log in. Since we've set up the authentication mode, now let's go back to the app again and refresh. Now sign in with Google. You can see, select the account. Nothing really happened here, but if I go to storage and in the index DB section, in the Firebase local storage DB, you'll see this data. UID, that's the unique user ID, email, is email verified, then the name and everything. So this means now we're successfully logged in to the application. So here you can see it was very simple and we've accomplished a lot with just this 4 or 5 line of code. Now let's see some user data when a user logs in and instead of this sign in with Google, we want to show sign out button. Right, auth on auth status changed user, and if user signs in, now once a user signs in, then we'll be showing them this data. Here instead of image, I'll just show the user ID, save it. Let's go back to the app, refresh it, let's sign in. And here you can see, since we were already signed in, so here instead of this page, we're able to see the updated one. You can see the name, email, and also the user ID. Now, if I click on sign out, then again, I get this page. And if I do sign in with Google again, we can then create an account. If I go to the Firebase console, refresh, here you can see a new user has been registered. Now let's integrate the Firestore DB here and add some data in it. Go back to the console, again in the build, here you see Firestore database, click on it, again create database. We'll be using the standard edition. If you use enterprise edition, then you will get to use complex queries. Next, and here you can select the default location. Next, here if you start it in production mode, then by default you will not be able to read any data or edit any data in the application. So these are the settings for production mode, but for development purpose we'll start it in test mode. So create, and this is where people make mistakes. They start the project in test mode and then they further don't harden the security rules properly and deploy it into the production. So that's where the database stays vulnerable and attackers take advantage of it. So this was the case that I identified in my target. Okay, so here you can see you can create collection, bucket, next, do it automatically. And here in the field, I'll say product, give it a name. You can also add another field, then save. We've created a product now. Now, let's go to the app and integrate it there. The functionality will be when I click onto this button, a random product will get added in the DB. Here, let's create listeners for these elements. Now we'll need a variable which will basically listen to the DB changes. We'll create unsubscribe, and then again, when the user authenticates, then we will create a variable which references the DB, and we can call it bucket since our collection name is bucket. And here when I click on create thing button, it will add a document where we'll create a UID field to identify which user has added the data. The name of the product. We'll also have to call all these variables, so collection, add doc, and server timestamp. Now, once the data is added, we need to update the list onto the UI. So this is the code. Here you can see we'll list all the data that is being added, and if there is any error, then we'll throw this error. After this, if the user is not logged in, then we'll just click on unsubscribe and the reference to the DB will be broken. Now, let's save it and go back to our web app, open the console. Okay, there are certain things we need to define, but we have not imported them. So let's do it. And here you can see data is now being successfully added. If I go to the Firebase console and refresh this page, now here you can see the data is now added successfully. Now the vulnerable lab is created. Here, let's say if I add some data without any user ID or some different user ID. Here, I'll just remove this user ID field, save it, refresh it. Now let's just add a few data. Here we don't see anything, but if I go to the DB, then you can see two more new data got added, but in this one, we don't have the UID as we have not added the field. Or maybe there are some different UIDs with some other user created. Here, we don't see the data, but app.js file here is publicly available. Then we can see the backend implementation of this and we can easily modify it, right? Now, in order to see all the data in the DB, my next course of action will be copy the code of this entire app.js since it has the integration with the configuration keys and everything, and then just remove this query and host the file, maybe locally. That will also serve the purpose. And now, again, if I go back to the index page, here you can see I'm not just getting the two data, but I'm getting every single one of it. Now similarly, let's say I don't have access to this application. I can't sign in it. All I have got is some app.js file or some other files. So then what we can do is now for showing this, I'll just create another JS file. Let's call it vuln.js and here copy this much code and we don't really need the auth library here, just remove it, and the Firestore integration code. Before it, just add a section and we'll show the data in this section. So for this, I'll create another variable called data exfil. After this, here we'll use this code, but without checking if the user is authenticated or authorized or not. This is the code for reading the database. Add it here. Don't even need the error here. Here, instead of things list, I'll just add data exfil. And in the index.html, I'll just call it vuln.js instead of app.js. And now let's refresh the application. We're not getting any data. Let's check it. Okay, thingsref is not defined. Here you can see query thingsref. For this, we'll also have to reference the DB, which is this. Here, one important thing for performing this exploit is this collection name. You need it in order to query the DB. So here, few things you can try is brute force the common bucket names that you see wildly out there, like user, bucket, or product, or such common names. Or these names also get leaked onto the error messages in some 500 pages maybe, or even onto some GitHub leaks. So you can also check for them, and accordingly you'll need to provide the collection name. Otherwise you won't be able to query the DB. Save it, refresh it, and here you can see we've got the data even without logging into the application. Now, if you don't want to write this code or if you face difficulties in understanding it, then there is also a tool which can automate this entire process and make it easier for you. It's called Base Runner. So I'll show you the GitHub repository. You can do the setup with these commands. I already have it installed, so I'll just show it to you by starting it. Here, I'm this directory and these are all the files. I'll type npm start here. I'll just open it. This is the interface. Here you just need to provide the Firebase config. This, make sure to have the curly braces like this and set config. Now let's say I want to read the collection, and here I need to provide the collection name. In this case it's bucket. Click on run, and here you can see all the data that is already been stored into the collection. So again, if you want to add any data into the collection, then you just need to provide the key and the value here and the collection name, and it will also add the data. Similarly, if you have any real-time database, which is often found in production servers, then you can also provide the database related information there. And also, if you have any storage buckets, then you can provide the file path and you can read the storage also from there. So now, how do we fix it? Since it is a client-side code and developers could create some mistakes. So how do we make sure that proper authentication checks are being validated from the backend? That's where we get to use the security rules. Here in the rules, this was the default rule that was implemented. Just do it false. By default, you can't read anything. And if we want to see some data, then we'll need to make sure that the UID of the user is matching with the UID that is already there in the data. Same for the read. Here it will be resource, not auth. Let's save it, go to the document and refresh. Okay, here you can see now we're getting error saying insufficient permissions. For this, we'll just have to change the JS file. Since we have vuln.js, we'll need to write app.js here. Control S. Now I can refresh and sign in with Google. Okay, we are already signed in. And here you can see again we're getting insufficient permissions. The reason is in the app.js file, here you can see we have removed the query and we're referencing everything instead of the particular user ID. So just change it to, now save it, and here you can see we're now successfully getting the data. So this was the fix for it. Make sure that before production you ensure that proper security rules are set so that unauthenticated or unauthorized access is not granted. So that's all for today's video. I hope you like it. I hope you have learned something new. Let me know if you have any doubts or any query. Put it down in the comments and I'll definitely try to clear it. So please like the video and share it to your friends if you think that it has taught you something useful, and definitely subscribe the channel as I'll be creating more such videos. So thank you and I'll see you next time.